Kamala Harris has a policy proposal for you. Let's watch.
And it is my promise to everyone here, when I am president, we will continue our fight for working families of America, including to raise the minimum wage and eliminate taxes on tips for service and hospitality workers.
All right, we're going to debate whether that's a good idea, or at least discuss that. I'm looking forward to it. I'm going to learn along with you guys. Saru Jayaraman joins us. She's the president of One Fair Wage and the director of Food and Labor Research Center at the University of California at Berkeley. Saru, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
No problem. So I want to go one at a time here and get caught up on where we stand. So first, what are the current rules across the country on whether service workers are paid $2.13 or they're paid a real minimum wage, et cetera?
Right. So unfortunately, there is a sub-minimum wage for tipped workers that is a direct legacy of slavery. It was created after emancipation to allow restaurants to hire newly freed Black women after emancipation, not pay them, and force them to live entirely on something new that had just arrived in America at the time called a tip. Fast forward from 1865, emancipation, all the way until today, that wage has gone from $0 to $2.13 at the federal level for a workforce that is enormous. 14 million restaurant workers across the country, and tipped workers in particular are overwhelmingly still today women, disproportionately women of color, single mothers, struggling with the highest rates of both economic instability and sexual harassment of any industry. 43 states in the US follow this legacy of slavery with a sub-minimum wage that in most states is below $5 an hour, forcing this workforce to have to tolerate all kinds of inappropriate customer behavior to get their minimum wage in tips. Now, there are 7 states, including Nevada, where that speech was given, that actually require a full minimum wage with tips on top and prove that that can be done successfully. But the National Restaurant Association, we call it the other NRA, has argued for over a century in the 43 states and at the federal level that they simply cannot pay more than $2 or $3, that they would go bankrupt. When we know that, in fact, the states that pay a full minimum wage with tips on top are actually doing better on every measure than the states that pay a sub-minimum wage.
So that leads to the next question. When we increase the minimum wage for tip workers, so let's say that it's $16 in California, which is the current around where the minimum wage is today in California. So are we all, this is just like a super earnest question for consumers out there. Are we all supposed to keep tipping at the same rate so that their wages go up accordingly? And it's going to lead to another question, but what's the etiquette there?
Look, $16.50 is the current minimum wage in California. That is nowhere near the actual cost of living in California per the MIT Living Wage Calculator, the EPI Family Budget Calculator. So yes, absolutely, tips are essential on top of a minimum wage to get people closer to the cost of living. Until we're talking about wages that actually are somewhere near what it actually costs to live in a state like California or anywhere in the country, then yes, tips are important on top of wages to get people closer to that cost of living. But the problem is that in most states, we're not even at $16.50, we're at $2 or $3, and tips are actually just to get people to the minimum wage, let alone closer to the cost of living. So, but the truth is that people don't tip based on whether they think people are earning a sub-minimum or a regular minimum wage. Most people in America have no idea that there even is a sub-minimum wage for tipped workers, and they tip regardless. Sadly, the research on tipping shows that tipping in this country is not correlated with how much people earn or even the quality of service. It's actually correlated with the race and gender of the server. If she's a woman, whether or not she lets a man touch her, those are the kinds of things that the research shows impact how much people get tipped. So tipping doesn't change in states that have a sub-minimum wage or a regular minimum wage. Tipping is pretty much the same everywhere. But that means that we need to ensure that everybody across the country gets that basic minimum wage so that they can count on a wage from their boss rather than having to rely on the biases and harassment of customers.
Yeah, I mean, part of the reason I asked is because that leads to a startling fact that if, let's pick a profession, if you're a waitress, that if you are in California, you're getting $16 an hour plus tips, whatever, 15, 20, 25%, right? if you're in, pick a state, I don't know if
New
Alabama.
Mexico,
Okay.
not that far.
Yeah, New Mexico. You're getting paid $2 plus tip, 15, 20, 25. That's not like in other professions, there's sometimes slight differences. Hey, it's more expensive to live in California than it is in New Mexico. There's a little bit of a difference in how much you pay an engineer or something along those lines. But nothing as stark as $2 or $16.
And it unfortunately doesn't even correlate with the cost of living. Massachusetts is the second most expensive state in the United States. The wage is $6.75 an hour. We actually have an initiative on this November's ballot in Massachusetts to raise that to 15 plus tips. But the wage that tipped workers get is not correlated at all with the cost of living. And that is why it needs to go. It's correlated, frankly, with the power of the state restaurant association in that particular state. In California, workers over decades have won over the California Restaurant Association, demanding a full minimum wage with tips on top. In Massachusetts and New Mexico, and frankly, plenty of other blue and red states, the Restaurant Association has tremendous amounts of control over electeds from both parties and manages to keep the wage at a ridiculous $2, $3, $4, $5, $6 an hour.
Yeah, and by the way, you all at home should know that there's a bunch of minimum wage ballot measures in the different states this election cycle. So Massachusetts, Missouri, California has it going up to $18. So you could actually get around the crooked politicians who take checks from the NRA. And of course, Kyrsten Sinema and Joe Manchin famously took checks from the National Restaurant Association after voting against increasing the minimum wage. It was just one of the most brazen acts of corruption I've seen in my lifetime. But with ballot measures, they don't have a choice. You go right around them, you vote based on it. And so make sure you're out there voting on those issues. So then I wanted to ask you, Saru, about the next thing. So which is Kamala Harris and Donald Trump, and to be fair, Trump did propose it first, have proposed this idea of no tax on those tips. I don't know, and I'm genuinely curious. That's part of why we asked you on. What's your take on that policy proposal?
Look, first of all, I want to say tipped workers are ecstatic because they've never been mentioned. Their needs have never been addressed in a presidential campaign before. I mean, prior to Trump bringing this up, we were really trying to get restaurant workers or even the minimum wage elevated in the campaign, and it wasn't happening. So first of all, excited to see that both candidates are finally recognizing what an enormous workforce this is. 14 million workers that largely don't vote. They have a 12% voter turnout rate in most elections. But it's clear that we know the thing that does motivate them, that does mobilize them. It's the top issue on every poll this year. It's the cost of living and jobs with living wages. That mobilizes these workers, and it's great to see that's being recognized with the wrong solution. Look, 2/3 of tipped workers don't even earn enough to pay federal income tax. When you earn $2, $3, $4, $5 an hour, you don't even earn enough, even with tips, to be eligible to pay federal income tax. So this proposal would not benefit the overwhelming majority of tipped workers. What we really need is what we call one fair wage, a full minimum wage with tips on top for all workers across the country. And we are heartened to see that President Kamala Harris has indicated that she's in favor of both raising the minimum wage and ending that legacy of slavery sub-minimum wage for tipped workers, in addition to ending taxes on tips. Two very different proposals. President Trump, when he talked about ending taxes on tips, that was followed by Senator Ted Cruz introducing a bill that would not only end taxes for tipped workers, but also end taxes for hedge fund billionaires, introducing, I think it was something like in the realm of $6 trillion in tax cuts for hedge fund billionaires. That was a Trojan horse bill. That was just about getting the 1% a tax cut. On the other side, we're looking at the Democratic proposal, which is let's raise the minimum wage and that sub-minimum wage for tipped workers. It's long overdue that it's got to go, and have a limited exemption of taxes on tipped workers alone, with a guardrail in terms of, what income we're talking about would get this exemption, ensuring that they're still paying into Social Security and Medicare so they don't lose out on those benefits. But that it's only exempted for tips on top of a minimum wage, not the tips that bring them to the minimum wage. Look, we got to get rid of that altogether. They need to be paid a minimum wage by their employer, not have tips bring them to the minimum wage.
Yeah, I'm a little worried about that tip proposal, exemption or otherwise, because then immediately everybody's going to say, let's just call it a tip. So all of a sudden, venture capitalists and hedge fund managers aren't going to get wages or bonuses, they're going to get tips. So are you sure?
There are guardrails on that second proposal around how much income you earn in order to get the qualification. So generally those folks would not qualify because tipped workers, even when you earn $15 an hour, that's under $30,000 a year. So anybody who earns more than that would not qualify to be exempted.
So you're saying Trump's proposal is fine, except that there is no limit and it's a Trojan horse.
Oh, no, it's not fine. The proposal has to be first and foremost end that sub-minimum wage for tipped workers. That's the
I get that part.
Yeah. There is no real use for ending taxes on tips unless you're ending the sub-minimum wage for tipped workers, because most workers wouldn't benefit. It's not a useful, effective, or really smart proposal. The only proposal that we're in favor of is one that first and foremost raises the wage, ends the sub-minimum wage, and gets rid of some limited taxes on tips only for workers who are low-wage workers who really need it.
Okay, so you answered whether you believe Trump's actually going to do it. That was going to be my last question because this is Trojan horse, as you explained, and that's easy. But let me ask you the hard question. Do you really think Kamala Harris is going to do either one of these things, ending the sub-minimum wage or the exemption, no tax tips?
There's only one way anybody does this, and that is through us organizing, movement, pushing, demanding. And I gotta tell you, post-pandemic, 1.2 million restaurant workers walked off the job demanding higher wages, saying, I'm sorry, I'm done, take your job and shove it. It forced thousands of restaurant owners to have to raise wages to recruit and retain staff. And in that historic moment of worker power, it's been a historic moment of worker power. We have been moving bills and ballot measures in over a dozen states to raise wages, all pushing towards a final federal bill that would get the minimum wage closer to the cost of living and frankly end all exemptions, not just for tipped workers, but workers with disabilities have a sub-minimum wage, youth have a sub-minimum wage, incarcerated workers have a sub-minimum wage. That's another legacy of slavery. The only way we get to what we really need, which is a living wage for all, getting rid of all exemptions, is by organizing. Organizing to win this at the state level, organizing and pushing on both the president, whoever it is, the vice president, and Congress to get it done. I agree with you. I don't think it's going to happen otherwise. It's on us to make it happen.
Yeah, I know you answered the question. Ballot measures, because we get around the politicians, love that. Make sure you're looking around for minimum wage ballot measures in your state. And yeah, even when the Democrat gets into office and promises, minimum wage increase is easy. That's one of our first priorities. They almost never do it. They haven't done it in decades. So.
And they typically leave out the tipped workers in state after state, blue state after blue state. We've seen tipped workers exempted from the minimum wage, even at the federal level. Democrats have raised the minimum wage and left out the tipped workers. So what we really need is to demand that nobody be left behind. After all, what is the use of a word minimum? Minimum means nothing less than. What is the use of that word if 20 million workers literally can earn legally less than the minimum wage? We need to demand that everybody be included and that minimum wage not be 15, not be 17. Do you know that the cheapest county in the United States is McClellan County, Texas? And even in McClellan County, according to the MIT Living Wage Calculator, you need a minimum of 20 to survive in the next couple of years. And so we need $20 and ending all sub-minimum wages. And that's what we're pushing for in the states. And that's what we ultimately want to see at the federal level, but only through organizing will we get there. I do want to say we just won the most historic victory in Michigan. 1.2 million workers just got a raise from $3.87 to $15 plus tips. That happened through 10 years of organizing and campaigning, and we just won. And we think Michigan is the first of many states to come. It's the first state east of the Mississippi to end that sub-minimum wage for tipped workers. We hope states like New York and Maryland and Illinois, Massachusetts soon to follow Michigan.
Yeah, so I'll end on a both optimistic and pessimistic note. You're totally right, and the American people almost always vote for higher wages, not for themselves necessarily, but for others because they're good, decent human beings. California and Missouri have already passed higher minimum wage earlier. They're making it even higher this time around. Those are very likely to pass. So that's the optimism. That's good news. The American people's hearts are in the right place. Of course, the bad news is that we're in such corporate rule dominated society and politics that we have to vote for a Democrat and then push them like hell to try to get to minimum wage, to a reasonable, livable minimum wage. And of course, the Republicans are hopeless. So that's the sorry state of our politics, but we have to do the hard work, and One Fair Wage is doing it and is showing success all across the country. So Saru, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for watching The Young Turks. Really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.